Welcome back. I'm here again with Trish Hetherington, and we're going to continue our discussion about how to fix some of these problems we're having with where our food's coming from, what's keeping it nutritious, and how that's affecting our health, right?
Absolutely. And
So,
Mary,
Trish,
you brought up some good points. And I think our colleague in common, Glenn, brought up also points where they're finding that all the money we're spending on pesticides, it has been a farce. What they've sold us about, using less water, more plants, feeding huge amounts of people has been a big lie.
yeah, and it certainly seems that way when you really look at the numbers. And then I think back to all the people I did research with, and there were some good people in there, with good intentions, good purpose. And so I think it's a lot of little lies packed together that the individuals themselves don't even recognize what this is leading into, what's causing the problem, because we're so focused on one little aspect of how can I make this piece better, certainly in science.
So
You're
their
looking at
little
very
piece of research, like it's all fragmented so that, person A's research might be true and person B's research might be true. However, it doesn't make C the best thing. Is that what you're saying?
kind of, yeah, these fragmented parts don't always fit back together
Got
as
it.
well as they need to. In fact, I
So
really
it's not
saw
an
that.
intentional lie. We would love to think that it's not an intentional
Yeah,
lie.
yeah. Well, plus I think there's too many people involved for it to be an intentional lie.
Probably.
I think there are just too many hands in there. Um, but it really doesn't matter in the end. What matters is that we're investing millions of dollars in healthcare, billions of dollars in healthcare.
Yeah.
We're investing billions of dollars in agriculture. We're investing billions of dollars in land restoration and environmental so-called protection. And our environment's getting worse, our soil's getting worse, our food production is getting worse, and our health is getting worse.
Right. Therefore,
And so I think that's the point where we have to say, they tell alcoholics, if you keep doing what you're doing, expecting a different result, that's insanity.
correct.
And I think we need to stop the insanity in terms of what we're spending on policies and research and misguided efforts to make things better.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like taking a diet pill while you're eating a bag of Doritos. Right?
Wait, is there a problem with that?
Not that color is for food is found in nature. However,
Right.
back in my day, yeah, before I
Well,
knew
you
better.
had some numbers there, right, on what we're spending with the healthcare.
Yes. Let me pull this up. So this was from a talk I did on diabetes. And this is back in 2012.
Okay.
And in 2012, because I'm sure it's gotten better, the US spends 2.5 times over, and this is the OECD is basically all of these countries put together.
Okay.
Right. And you'll see that over on that left-hand corner, that's like per person, we're number one. Right?
So we're spending
the
more money than anybody else in the
be number
world
one in everything. Right.
by a
And
long shot.
unfortunately, it is expenditure on healthcare or sick care, I would say. We're spending so much money, and yet we're sicker than every single one of these countries.
And the number has skyrocketed. A couple of years ago, I saw a report showing what the average American spent on healthcare in 1964. And I remember keying in on that because some significant things happened in my life
Yeah.
about that time. I was born in 1964. I just gave my age away. But
You were? I'm 2 years older than you? All right.
Okay. So
Listen
in
to me.
1964, our families were spending $264 a year for a family of 4 on healthcare. Today, you might spend that on one visit to a physician, and that's probably only your copayment,
Oh, yeah.
not the total cost of the healthcare.
Well, it depends on if you've hit your deductible, of course.
Right, and what your plan looks like and a lot of other factors, but it's an unbelievable difference in price. And
Well, the thing is, Mary, that what we're spending now on our healthcare are things that weren't really a thing back in the 60s, because most of it now is lifestyle, poor nutrition driven.
right,
It's not like you're breaking a leg all the time, right?
exactly.
That's what we spent money on as kids. You got the flu, or you broke your leg, or something like that. Now it's lifestyle induced illness.
Yeah,
Dis-ease.
and
Yeah.
like I say, 254 or something in that range was what I saw in 1964 per family of 4. So divide that, we're what, roughly $60 per person.
Yeah,
Versus
but then you add in
$8,000. What's your number here? 8233 per capita. So enormous difference.
Yeah.
And I guess where we need to.
Wasn't that the rise of in the 60s, the fast foods, the big ag was really starting to get some teeth, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, I can remember in the 60s, there was still a milkman that would deliver bottles of milk to the door. And so the dairies were
that's nice.
were fairly close by. It was a big deal to go to McDonald's.
Oh my gosh. There was one, we're going to move on in a second, but when I was, so let's say 1970, 8, 9, 10 years old, 71, all right, 72. We would have to drive 45 minutes to get to a fast food joint across town from Green Tree, this is out of Pittsburgh, to Bellevue to get to a Burger King.
Okay. Yeah. So it wasn't something you did on the drop of a hat.
No.
And okay. And I remember living outside of a small village. My little brother and I would walk about 1.5 miles to the little grocery store in town if we saved up enough pennies and would buy candy.
Candy.
We're
but
walking
you walked
1.5 miles to eat some penny candy. Okay. Yeah. Today, that nobody even sells penny candy. You sell big candy bars. Nobody sells those little candies that were bite-sized.
Right.
We get king-size Butterfingers.
High-end ice cream store across town, and I'm like, no, not unless you ride your bike there. And ride your bike home.
Yeah. It's so the way we do things has changed a lot, but I guess what we need to add
from this next slide, right? Just diagnosed diabetes, $245 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
direct medical
because I'm probably
costs
squinting here. I'm
and
sitting where there's a
reduce.
terrible glare with my glasses, so I took them
Oh,
off. And
yeah, it's 176 billion in direct medical costs, and then 69 billion in reduced productivity.
yes,
Put them all together. It's
and
ridiculous.
and then you look at the social dynamics of that. You know, if mom, or it could be dad, is the person with diabetes and the reduced productivity, who's raising the kids? What are they seeing as role models? How's that working? And how's that affecting their development?
Yeah.
Um, it's a big challenge for a family when somebody's sick.
You know, and these things take time typically to really start affecting the body where it can be diagnosed. And that is years of inflammation, right? Years of poor nutrition. And we've been told, right? How many times did they get to change that pyramid?
Right, right.
We've been
And
said,
yet, this
oh
is
my God, so
this
much
is
bull.
where you have to ask yourself, are the science and the politics what's causing the problem? Because if you think back to the people who were adults in the 60s and the elderly people in the 60s, these people grew up without food pyramids. They grew up without school lunch programs. They grew up without anybody weighing and measuring and putting labels on their food telling them what to eat.
Yep.
When my mother describes her childhood, oh man, if you had enough war coupons, sugar coupons, to even buy sweets, that was something you shared with the family.
Oh yeah.
You didn't gorge on your own. And and I think the attitude when I look at my parents' generation was all this gratitude that we have the abundance now.
Yeah.
But but the abundance is sort of a false image because we have an abundance of calories, but it's sparse in nutrition. The nutrition isn't there.
And when we get around to the economies of health and the economies of the environment and the economies of day in and day out life, I mean, they're talking boomers, which, I'm at the end of that boomer thing and having no retirement money. Well, if you look at this slide here, and that's the last one I'm going to share, you're spending $10,000 a month on average, $9,000.24. And that was back in 2012, remind you.
This is what you're
On,
spending
on being sick by lifestyle diseases
right.
or nutrition driven diseases.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing that because it's absolutely ridiculous.
Right. In fact, it's maybe a morbid thought, but it's crossed my mind several times that we have more sick people today in the US than we had dying during the Black Death in Europe.
Wow.
And while I wouldn't wish the Black Death on anybody, another way to look at it is to realize that if somebody gets sick and dies with the Black Death, you're gone in a few weeks, maybe a month. Okay? If you're sick for 30, 40, 50 years, the cost of that to your family and to the next generation is enormous.
Absolutely.
And we can't, it's not an issue to blame. It's an issue to say, let's look at how we fix this. Let's look at how we avoid creating that, because that's where our generational wealth is disappearing. If you had to take care of a sick person for a month, it's traumatic, it's sad, you lost somebody you loved, you wonder how you're going to support yourself afterwards, but you still have a house.
If you're lucky, if you haven't lost it.
Yeah. And we see people all the time now losing their homes, losing their resources. it used to be very common for children to inherit a home or inherit land or inherit something from families. Now that's all going to medical.
Sorry, I was talking to my son for a second. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. I'm
I just got back home. Okay.
Okay.
I needed yeah, sorry.
No problem. No problem. That's what I love about the kind of work we do. It doesn't matter if family needs something. Okay. Uh, so yeah, I think what we promised last week is we were going to talk about solutions. I'm starting to get depressed with this conversation. But
Well, think of it as here we just set out the opportunities. Right? Here are the facts. What can we do about it? What opportunities do we have to reverse this?
well, exactly, because wherever there's a problem, there's great need, and wherever there's need, there's opportunity. And this is where I get excited nowadays with what we know about putting all these parts together. If you only look at healthcare, it is just a tragic, depressing picture in our world today. If you look at what's happening in education, it's a tragic, frustrating picture. We're spending more and more on education, and our kids are getting less and less able to support themselves when they get out of high school. You know, in the 50s, a kid out of high school was prepared for the workforce. Now, a 4-year college degree isn't enough. They need master's degrees.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at what's happening in agriculture, oh my gosh, farms have been closing for 50 years.
Yeah.
But when we start putting all these parts together and looking at the whole picture, we realize that it's really because everything's so fragmented that it's become so big, so difficult, and so expensive. And I think that when you bring all these things back into the same nest, think about it. You start fixing the way your food is grown and the soil it's grown in, you're tackling the environment, you're tackling, you're sequestering carbon, you're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, you're reducing the amount of fertilizer that we need as runoff. So you're fixing the environment once again, but you're also adding an enormous nutritional quality to the food that is missing today. And when you start putting all those nutrients back, guess what that does? That transcends into healthcare. And so now our food, and once again, if you're doing things closer to home, you're eating fresher, more local food grown on better soils, all of a sudden healthcare improves. And we still see people today.
We've got some great farmers, organic farmers here in Longmont that are diligent about regenerative soils. And is that what you're talking about, this regenerative farming?
Right. Once we start building, the soil is as sick as our public health is. You know, we've been, in about 1912, the U.S. Department of Agriculture defined a complete fertilizer as a fertilizer that contained nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. 3 elements. Now, you've been in nutrition how long? I mean, we need many more than 3 elements in our diet. But if we've gone over a century just adding 3 elements to the soil, and no farmer's that thick-headed. I mean, most farmers are adding more than 3 elements. But what I was taught in the College of Agriculture was that you continually you fertilize with N, P, and K every season. Depending on what you're growing, there's ways to figure out how much you need. But then if you see deficiencies, then you add things like magnesium or iron or anything else, you know. And so you look at your soil test, you look at what's going on, but you wait until there's a deficiency before you have these other things. nobody's looking at the trace elements. So just like, in nutrition, most nutrition schools are not saying, gee, every now and then a little bit of gold might have a purpose in the diet. Okay, every
That's like
healthy forest soil in the world has tiny, tiny traces of gold or silver or other elements.
that's
But
like giving athletes sodium and potassium
right,
after sweat, right? I
right.
mean, there's like 30 things that make up the chemicals in your sweat. And it's not just sodium and potassium.
And so the soil's the same way. It needs those trace elements, those micronutrients, and it needs living microorganisms to recycle those mineral nutrients, to keep them mobilized, keep them moving into the plants. And if you're growing food locally, fresh food locally that has all these microbes and minerals in the soil, guess what? Your food becomes a probiotic and a prebiotic.
That's just crazy. Living things. I don't know, Mary. Living soils producing, thriving bodies. Where's that disconnect?
I'm a biologist. I mean, the word pro-life has a completely different meaning to me. We need some life in us.
Absolutely. And you can test for it. I did a talk on the energy of food, and they can test tomatoes that have been grown in live soils, right, with all the microbes, or in water hydroponically and thrown onto the store shelves.
Right, right. And there's a different nutritional quality. There's a different energy transfer. It's a whole different quality of food. And the flavor is totally different.
Oh, absolutely.
I've been working with a gardener here for a couple of years who started out with really, really horrible soil. We're in the desert. It was pure caliche. It was stuff that everybody advised not to garden. And each year, the food gets just a little bit sweeter,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what happens when you start putting back into the soil instead of just taking out. So I'm going to share a slide here that I put together for a presentation some time ago, but
You are squinting.
yeah. Well, I can wipe everybody out with the glare.
Just tilt your head down a little, I guess.
Or I can switch. But this has big print, so I'll take that off, and next time I'll play with the lighting a little bit more beforehand. But in any case, a phrase that really kind of captured my imagination a few years ago was this concept of turning the green revolution into an evergreen revolution. And people outside of agriculture may or may not be familiar with the story of the Green Revolution, but it was really kind of a poster child of what technology was doing for humanity in the 1950s. And
What's so good about this?
About the Green Revolution?
And versus evergreens, because we'll have to, really get into this next week. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think this is really kind of the solution that we're talking about, is moving from, the Green Revolution was really based on adding a lot of new technologies. So we were using genetic experiments to hybridize the wheat, and then we were supplementing it with nitrogen, with NP and K. Okay, and it had become cheaper and cheaper to make a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. But even by the 1960s, people were recognizing that this is not a sustainable system. It's starting to deplete.
Why is it not sustainable?
Right. In fact, if you look at some of the writers of the time, E.F. Schumacher was complaining that, he wrote a book called Small is Beautiful. He was an economist.
Mm-hmm.
And his observation was that the move toward more chemical fertilizer and more hybridized crops was also concentrating land ownership and wealth into the hands of the few. And
Which
uh,
has happened.
right, right. I mean, by the
Yeah.
1980s, we were in the midst of a farm crisis. And one of the people who worked with Norman Borlaug, who's credited for the Green Revolution, was an Indian scientist by the name of Mankombu Swaminathan, who's still alive today, still actively promoting the Evergreen Revolution today. But he was one of the first to really start talking about the soil depletion that was coming with the new agricultural approach.
Hmm.
And so he started saying then that if we continued on the path we were on, we were going to basically create an era of agricultural disaster. I don't think anyone at that time was taking that next step to what it would do to human health. But
Oh,
but but obviously we know now that if you're eating food that's depleted of nutrients from the soil up, it's going to have an impact on your physical health. And we've seen a steady increase in healthcare costs that can be correlated. Now, correlation is not causation, but we do have other data that supports causation. It can certainly be correlated with the growth in health problems, health issues, the rise of chronic disease. So while we've made huge gains in getting rid of infectious disease, we really haven't made health better. And
well, I'm excited to hear more about this next week. And what comes to my mind is, we have all these studies that people like yourself, brilliant people like yourself do, and yet all I can think of is, science class in high school, back to nutrition class in college, and my grandma. Like right? Like regenerating the soil and rotating crops and, all these things that I heard growing up.
so your grandmother was talking about crop rotation and
In her little farm. She just
yeah,
had a little thing in her backyard,
yeah,
after the war or during the war. And she would can, and she's like, well, you got to put the good stuff back in.
right.
And
So we knew all this
yeah,
before we had standardized education, standardized healthcare, and heavily
yeah,
regulated agriculture. People were doing all this,
yeah,
and so yeah, I think I'm convinced that the answer lies in going back to a more local system that's doing more regenerative kinds of agriculture and health, that's putting individuals more in charge of their agriculture and their health.
yeah.
And
There's a lot of money at stake for us being big ag and big health.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
but I think, if you look at the money, I mean, you just showed us. Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody's making
The
that
government
money,
can't keep up with this.
but a lot of people are losing that money. And
Yeah.
then even industry hurts because now they're getting taxed for benefits to help these people who can't pay their bills. It just creates a fragmented economy. So
And when
so actually,
Medicaid goes
yeah,
bankrupt, yeah, everybody's going to be crying.
right, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think next week we come back, we talk about why an evergreen revolution can improve the environment, it can improve our health and the health of our soils, it could improve our economy. I like to throw out it also helps us with our relationships, because I think if you talk to enough people, a lot of us would like to go back to a day when things were a little more simple. Our lives weren't so fragmented. And so,
Yeah, I'm finding that is true just on a book club I joined. People are really also starving for relationships.
So Trish, we've covered a lot of information and you've shared a lot of your expertise with nutrition and health and the cost of healthcare. If people want to get in touch with you after listening to this, where do they find you?
The best way to get in touch with me would be via email.
Okay.
Yeah, if you call me on the phone and I don't know your number, I won't answer. Yeah, too many calls like that these days. So my best email is training X as an X-ray, Trish at gmail.com.
trainingxtrish@gmail.com.
Right.
Okay, you heard it.
And
And
how
if
about
you
you,
want to get in
Mary?
touch with me, it would be mary@endofite.com. And that's ENDOFITE for Endofite.
Excellent.
So we will see you next week.